Hello and welcome to another episode of the Men for Life podcast. I'm Sean Corcoran, the CEO of Men for Life. At Men for Life, we are working to change the narrative that men have no voice in the abortion debate and replace it with a new truth that real men are protectors, providers, pro-family, pro-woman, and pro-life. Today, our guest is Dr. Jeffrey Pauls. Dr. Pauls is the Director of Research at the Vitae Foundation. How are you, Dr. Pauls?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Sean.
Thanks for coming. Do you want me to call you Dr. Pauls or do you want me to call you Jeff?
Jeff would be great.
Okay. My wife is a dentist, and when I work in her office, I have to remember to call her Dr. Corcoran, or nobody else will know who I'm talking about.
Well, I force my kids to call me Dr. Daddy, so I
like that.
It was a joke in the house at one point, but
I like
Jeff
that.
Jeff is good.
All right, Jeff. Can you tell us what the Vitae Foundation is? Just briefly, what the Vitae Foundation is, what you guys do, and how you got involved.
Yeah, Vitae is an amazing organization based in Jefferson City, Missouri. I knew about it, to a certain extent growing up because I grew up about a half hour north of Jeff City in Columbia, which is where the University of Missouri is. So Jeff City was always kind of the big rival for us, but I somehow knew about Vitae Foundation. My parents were pro-life and had been supporters and that sort of thing. But I had really no idea what Vitae did until I was asked to come on board right after finishing my doctorate in education. So I'd done some research work at the University of Missouri St. Louis, and I'd been a teacher most of my career. And at that point, though, I had knew somebody at Vitae, and they said, "Hey, you've got a research background. We're doing this great pro-life research, and we'd love for you to come on board. You can make your own hours, and you can work from home." And I had little kids at that time, and I said, "That sounds pretty good." When I teach, they don't let me do that. So and at that time we were living we were in Illinois, moving to St. Louis, where we live now. But it's about 2 hours away, and so I can get down there to the office when I need to. But it was a good fit, and I had become very passionately pro-life through a kind of a grassroots pro-life running team called Life Runners. And so that was kind of where I was just doing a lot of volunteer work at that point. I actually prayed. I remember praying a prayer, "God, show me how I can get more involved in the pro-life movement." I always tell people, like, be careful what you pray for, because pretty soon, within a year after that, I'm at Vitae Foundation working full time in the pro-life movement. But again, Vitae has been around since the early 90s, founded by a man named by Carl Landwehr, who's a sociologist kind of by trade. He was working with Missouri Right to Life and basically kind of spun up Vitae out of that work. And early on, Carl was asked, if life was a product, how would you market it? And that's really how Vitae got started, because from the very beginning, Vitae's used a consumer research approach to finding out about the emotional responses that people have towards abortion. And it's called right brain research. Carl was connected with a gentleman named Dr. Charles Kinney, the founder of Right Brain People, who worked with all sorts of Fortune 500 companies to look into the emotional connection, the emotional responses that the customers of these different companies had. I mean, Chevrolet, Walmart, Maybelline, American Express, you'd know most all of them. And but the unique thing that Carl and Dr. Kinney did was to use that methodology to explore those emotional responses that people have towards abortion. And so it's a unique kind of consumer research that they've done since the very beginning. early on, that research was really applied kind of internally at Vitae, just like any sort of market research would be. Pepsi's not going to do market research and then share it to the world because out of the goodness of their hearts they're gonna use it to create ads and messaging that will try to bring more customers in. And so Vitae was doing that initially, creating ads, TV ads. That were pro-life, that were based on the consumer research that they had done. And it was designed to create cognitive dissonance in the mind of the viewer. And the taglines were "Think about it." So it was a very kind of non-confrontational approach, non-political. It was very much a consumer, like marketing the product of life in a consumer focused way, to avoid kind of the the vociferous conflict that was kind of wrapped up in the two different sides of the abortion debate. It was more like one of the examples of the early TV ads was just a woman in her living room, and she said, I had always considered myself pro-choice, and and then I, and just basically, considered, didn't really consider what it was in the womb. But then when I had a baby, I knew what it was. And she said, why was it that when I didn't really care what it was, I didn't call it a baby, but when I wanted a baby, that's what it was. Think about it. And it was, I probably, bumbled the exact wording. It's been a while.
It makes sense. Would that be similar to the miscarriage part of the debate or the conversation, which would be that nobody's going to tell someone who had a miscarriage, you don't need to worry about it. There's no reason to grieve. It's just a fetus. It's just a clump of cells, right? And so then does that mean that it's a baby if the person wants the baby, and it's not a baby if the person doesn't want the baby? And is that similar to what you're talking about?
I think that's exactly right. I think that was the kind of the point of the ad, in a way that was a little bit softer, to say, like, just think about it. Think of, like, that's the cognitive dissonance that, it's like, well, yeah, I didn't really think about, when I didn't think about it, or when it wasn't, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like it's kind of like the law. And I forget, some of the states have these laws that are still in place, and where if an assailant, murders, I mean, most pro-lifers have heard this, but, they murder the woman, and she's pregnant, they're charged with two counts of manslaughter or murder. And and then, but if the same woman goes to the abortion mill and kills the child, then, they're obviously not, charged with murder. And so same age, same woman, same, everything, except, one was, she was choosing to do that. She did not want the child. It was not, or she didn't consider it a child or whatever. But, so I think there's a little bit of similarity there. But yeah, I think you're right. And, there were TV ads early on at Vitae, and then there were bus ads and subway ads, and then, started getting into, with the advent of the digital age, digital marketing with this research. And so there, continue to be more research studies along the way. And Vitae really moved into helping pregnancy centers be kind of laser focused in on the woman at the now moment, when she's facing an unexpected pregnancy, and going to, or on her computer, on her phone, where can I get an abortion, closest place to get abortion, and that when she does that a pop-up ad would come up that we knew would resonate with her because we'd already done the research about what was really impactful emotionally to her. And so the right messaging, the right wording would pop up, and it would point her to a pregnancy help center rather than, so that, those would pop up, at the same time that Planned Parenthood was popping up when she was doing that search. And, that was very, very effective. And we partnered really closely with a lot of pregnancy help centers across the country. And we still do that kind of work as well. And that was, very effective and powerful. And just to see how many, women, would be, and then it would get difficult, because if they were really abortion minded and really didn't necessarily want to, they wanted to find the Planned Parenthood, then they'd go to the abortion or go to the pregnancy help center. Then of course their work would be cut out for them then, because they had to, really try to help a woman who try to help counsel her and talk her, I don't want to say talk her into something, but to help provide the resources and help that she might need to make, a choice that she,
Just give her as much information as she could possibly receive.
That's right.
That she's not getting from anywhere else. So
Exactly.
that when she makes that decision, she at least has all of the information available to her, which I think is the real message that pro-life care centers are doing, is just providing all the information that no one else is going to provide, because the other side is marketing abortion. And when you're marketing abortion and someone calls and says, I don't know what I need to do, I was talking to Victoria Robinson a couple of days ago, and she said when she called, she explained her life situation. I've got a young child, and and I'm unmarried. I have a supportive boyfriend, but this is my life situation. And the sale, right? It was a sale by the abortion clinic to say, you want to be the best mom you can be, and you can't be that mom if you're working two jobs. And I'm not. This isn't her exact story, but this is similar to what they said. I don't want to butcher Victoria's story, but you can't be that person and work 7 days. It was two jobs, 7 days a week, and be a good mom to the daughter you already have. So you need this, as opposed to the pregnancy care centers, which when someone comes in, like, they know what they're up against. They know this person many times wants an abortion. And so it's a matter of, all you can do is give them as much information as possible. It's not a matter of, hey, I'm going to sit you down right now and I'm going to convince you that you're pro-life by the time you leave here, because that's never going to work. Like, the only thing they can do is say, let me show you what's going on inside. Let me show you this ultrasound that you're not going to get at Planned Parenthood. Let me give you this information about how big your baby is right now and how development goes. Let me give you this information on what it means to be pregnant, what it means to give birth. And then that person's going to make whatever decision they're going to make. Nobody's handcuffing them to the chair and making them, swear to choose life before they'll let them leave. There's always the prayer afterwards that we've reached the person, and that they're going to take that information and make the right choice.
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing what pregnancy help centers do, pregnancy resource centers. It's almost like the idea that, the women that are choosing abortion, I mean, they're going in for a major, if they're getting a surgical abortion at Planned Parenthood or whatever abortion mill they're going to, some sort of major surgery. And yet there's no informed consent. There's no, they're not being told, and this goes to what you were saying, like they're not being given the information about what it really means, or what, it's everything. And it goes to the point that, why is it that the abortion industry has to do everything they possibly can to downplay, what abortion is? It's because it's not good. It's not good for the, it obviously is killing the child. It's not good for the woman. And so it's all, they can't just present the truth and present like the actually what's happening medically, in terms of the different kinds of abortions, whether that's, we could get graphic and explain, what happens in an abortion, but they, that literally is what happens, but they will never inform the woman that that's what's going to be happening to the fetus. Because, obviously they would, if we were telling people what abortion was, just like any other procedure, like here are the risks, here's what is going to be involved in the procedure, here's what you're going to go through, here are the possible, side effects and that sort of thing. We would be we'd have so many fewer abortions, but they can't do that because the truth, would ruin the whole industry.
Right.
And,
The whole
and
nonprofit
yeah,
nonprofit
yeah,
industry
right.
making nearly $1 billion off of
Yeah.
the U.S. government.
Yeah. Which again, total opposite at the Pregnancy Help Center, level where and now, yes, some states are giving them money, but for the longest time, just being run by good-hearted volunteers through, like voluntary donations and stuff like that, trying just to get, information into their hands and, support them, try to, identify and address, the needs that the women might be facing, reasons why they think they must choose abortion, helping them with, actual, situations like transportation or job or childcare or, any of those things. Pregnancy help centers are doing that. And, you know, and not charging anything, for it. And whereas the abortion industry is not doing any of that, making the woman unpregnant, oh, you're able to go back and, just go back to your life and, we'll charge you, whatever it is. It's been going up and up and up, but, from $400 to several $1,000s, and then, sending them back out into the same, situation so that hopefully they come back again, for repeat business. And it's just, such a contrast in love and honesty and care for the child, care for the woman, so it's amazing.
And you mentioned that, and I kind of cut you off and changed directions because you were talking about how the Vitae Foundation worked with pregnancy resource centers to send their message. And I think what I heard you say was that we did that. We still do some of that. What else? What other? What else does Vitae Found? Like, who else do you work with? Who else are you helping to with this market research?
Yeah. Thanks for connecting us back there. Because that was kind of the direction that, Vitae had gone over the years, really focused the research and focused it towards, these different messaging and marketing approaches, campaigns, internally at Vitae. So in about 2015 or so, that was right after I came on, and it wasn't my decision. It was, Carl and Debbie Stokes has worked with Carl for a long, long time. Then at that time we had a president, he's a retired colonel in the Air Force, and his name's Rob Rezavi. They kind of together decided, I describe it kind of like, that Vitae at that point decided through a lot of, study, forethought, prayer, that we would, kind of, not that we were, burying our treasure to where it wouldn't produce any fruit, because, the treasure of I look at the research as like a treasure. And it wasn't that we were burying it. It was just that we were using it internally, just like I said, all market research is used. Pepsi is not going to share their market research with Coke. And that makes sense. But we're in a little bit different situation as a nonprofit, and especially as a nonprofit wanting to really help the pro-life movement, to really help, um, save lives, save babies, help women, help families, that sort of thing. And so at that time, we really kind of decided, let's try to share this research with other pro-life organizations, with the world. And we were given an opportunity out in Denver to share it, and to build to help them build a group of pregnancy centers, using the research. It was a group of centers that are called Marisol now. But everything from the really building it from the ground up, um, kind of based on the research. And but the idea was, okay, this is really the first time that we've shared. It was the first time that we'd accumulated and summarized all of the research into one place, and then basically just said, okay, here's the PowerPoint. Here you go. Here's what we know. Here's what we'd like to share with you, and we're happy to answer questions and help you build this. But and then since then we've done that and we continue to do this with, a wide variety of pro-life organizations. One of the organizations pretty early on that we shared it with, we went down to Dallas and shared it with Lauren Muzica of Sidewalk Advocates for Life, just because she kind of saw she'd heard about the research. There was a very famous article called Abortion, A Failure to Communicate. And it was written by a gentleman named Paul Swope. And he worked for Vitae at the time, out east. And it can still be found. It was published in First Things. At one time, I think it was the most searched, when all of those articles got put online. It was the most searched article in First Things history for a while. And so it's very, very powerful. And it really focuses in on kind of that early research that Vitae did about how a woman is, when she faces unexpected pregnancy, she is dealing with these emotions of feeling like she's trapped, like her life is over. And, she's facing, what she even used. And we still hear women in a lot of the research interviews that we do talk about that abortion is a necessary evil. So they call it an evil. And these are women that have had abortions that are not pro-life. And in that study, that very first study talked about abortion as the least of three evils, not because it really is, but because that's how they perceived it. Emotionally, that's how women facing unexpected pregnancy looked at it. And it's tragic because those of us who are pro-life advocates and activists, I used to love that neat. It was kind of, there was a meme, but it was also a bumper sticker too, where it said abortion, but then it crossed out the B and there was a D placed in it, and then it crossed out the R. So it like abortion got transformed into adoption. And you could see that kind of, just through the crossing out of the letters. And then, like I said, online, there was one that kind of just like abortion was on the screen, and then it just kind of emerged into adoption. And I used to always, quote, and, it's still powerful, and there's so many great adoption, pro-life adoption ministries and groups and organizations out there. And I love what they do, and I'm so supportive of them. But they have an uphill battle based on this research that we've done, because women look at adoption as almost the and again, we're not going to be careful about these terms, but when they say like the third option, the third most desired option is adoption, because they see it as kind of the worst of both, emotionally anyway. Again, this is just what their emotional experiences of dealing with unexpected pregnancy is it doesn't mean that it's not something that we can get around. It's something that these, wonderful adoption organizations can deal with, but it's important for them to know what they're up against kind of through this research. That a lot of women that we've interviewed over the years look at adoption as the most difficult way to go or to get out of the unexpected pregnancy, because they're going through 9 months of pregnancy. They're not then getting to be, and they look at it like as a gift to be a mother, but they're not getting that. And then they're also having to deal with what has traditionally been looked at like a giving up of their child. We even hear that term like, oh, I gave it up for adoption, even though, a lot of the adoption organizations will tell you, no, we don't use that language. It's like we lovingly place this child in a home, that desires, this baby. But they worry then that, the baby will be placed in, a bad situation and could be abused. And then they don't know what's going to go on with the baby. And again, a lot of that's dealt with now with more like open adoptions and things like that. But still, even nowadays, with our most recent research 2 years ago, women were still talking about this adoption being the least favored option because of those things. And so it's just important to know kind of what she's dealing with emotionally. And then of course, carrying the child to term is the second favorite option. Because again, she feels like if I do carry this child to term, my life as I know it is over.
And right now we're talking about in abortion-minded people.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. I mean, basically, women that face an unexpected pregnancy. So, and this would be women that aren't planning to get pregnant, and even it's like it's hard to believe for those of us who are pro-life, again, advocates. And this was something that we learned early on, through this research and we would talk to pregnancy centers about this too, is like, when you start to kind of use this approach where we're focusing on the woman a little bit more, like more so than the baby, and we're focusing on like her needs and her emotions and everything like that, so a lot of board members of pregnancy centers and such, would say like, wait a minute, it seems like we're giving up the most powerful and important argument for life, and that's the humanity of the unborn child. And we would talk about, we're definitely not giving that up, but if we're going to reach that woman that's facing an unexpected pregnancy at that now moment, especially if they're abortion determined or abortion vulnerable or whatever, but most of them, if they're facing an unexpected pregnancy, are, quite frankly, unfortunately, even if they're pretty pro-life, this is what a lot of pro-lifers don't really understand, is that emotionally, if you're not ready for that situation and that happens, even if now again, there's going to be a lot of people that was like, okay, they have an unexpected pregnancy, and they've they're strongly pro-life, and they're like, okay, well, now how do I do this? I'm going to do it, but it's scary. It's still scary. And I'm going to do it. But there's like a majority of them, especially the women that we interview, which are from the movable middle, they're not strongly pro-life or strongly pro-abortion or what they would call pro-choice, is that, when we've interviewed them and they've been in unexpected pregnancies, and even some women that haven't faced unexpected pregnancies, but are kind of in that movable middle area, they are looking at it like, well, it's either the baby's life or mine. And again, we don't look at it like that. And we had to talk to some of these pregnancy help centers boards and such that say like, if we create an ad or messaging campaign, and it doesn't resonate with you, that's a good thing. You're not our target audience. Our target audience is young women who are facing unexpected pregnancy, you are a 60-year-old, man or woman who's on the pregnancy center board, and the message needs to resonate with her, not you. And so that was a little bit of a little bit difficult when we would work with centers like that. And but again, getting back to like that those three choices, carrying to term, she considers that like, well, if I do that, I am giving this child a chance at life. And they understand that, it's not like what we thought way back when, that, and there's still people that think like this, and it's okay. I always say that, the pro-life movement we have to come at it from lots of different angles. But one of those angles is like consumer research, which is what the angle that we're, coming at it from. That a lot of people will still say, well, as long as we can just get the woman to understand that it is a human life inside her, then she will not choose abortion. And that's not true based on what we've seen from the women that we've interviewed, that they know that it's a life. They know that the child is alive and it's a human being and it's, their child, but they're over, the emotional response of either me or the child overrides that knowledge. And it's like, and now more so we're hearing more justifications of it, to where, it's like you said earlier with Planned Parenthood telling them, if you want to be a good mother, you need to have an abortion now so that you can take care of your other two children, or you can protect your future family. You're not ready for a child right now at age 16, 18 or whatever. You need to have an abortion so that you can be a good mother when you're 30 years old, and then they're putting that justification in. It's like, well, it's justified to do this. I'm actually doing a good thing, by doing this. And so, and then of course the third, the first option that so many women choose is the abortion, because they think in their mind at that time that's the only one that preserves their life. And of course, Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry feeds that and tells them that's exactly right. And they build that up and says to indicate that, look, this is the only way that you'll be able to get back to your normal life. If you, especially, with the chemical abortion, the abortion pill, no one will even know. You can take this pill, you can do it at home, and you'll do it early enough that you won't.
Safer than Tylenol.
Yeah, exactly. It's like Tylenol. It's as safe as Advil. Of course, we can get into that because we did, one of our research studies was on the abortion pill. And the only women that say that it's, like that or easier than surgical abortion even are the ones that have not gone through it. The ones that have gone through it for the most part are the ones that say it was way worse than what they told me. The pain, the trauma, mental and physical, the blood, everything was just, and so, unfortunately though, that's what we're dealing with. I mean, that's the kind of stuff, that's what the research goes into. And, of course we could go much deeper into that, but I think, that's to answer your question, kind of getting back to like what we do now. We continue to do that research, but we just share it, now with, really our most recent strategic plan has been to focus on trying to get this research into the hands of other, like pro-life influential groups, other pro-life peer groups that we have, but also into, kind of like prominent, groups of, we've got like, representational influencers and relational influencers. So we've got representational influencers that are like politicians, and pro-life politicians, but we've got attorneys groups, or like Thomas More Society, or any of those kinds, and then we've got the relational influencers like pastors and counselors and people like that. So that's what we're trying to do now, is to kind of amplify this research and getting it into their hands and helping them, with different marketing campaigns and basically sharing the pro-life message in a more effective, research-based, evidence-based way, based on what we know from you know what we know from the past research studies on women. And then I know, hopefully we can talk about it a little bit, but our future research, we've got our next research study coming up that will be all focused around men, which is obviously your area of interest and expertise with this show and with the organization and with everything that you've done.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to. Great segue, because that's what I wanted to get to next, was how you and I got connected. Through you and the Vitae Foundation working on this new men's study, and both of us having the same interests, parallel interests here. So tell us about this men's study, because I think it's a really big deal. I love that we're doing this. We're recording today, the day after Father's Day. Last week, Live Action put out the film they did with Greg Mayo and myself, and two amazing women who talked about lost fatherhood, essentially. So I think that the timing, not just in the conversation that you and I are having, not just in the fact that other pro-life organizations are like bringing this to the forefront, but also, all the pregnancy centers I've talked to are hyper focused on fathers right now. I think that there is just a lot of understanding and a lot of momentum in the understanding that the next wave to change and end abortion is to reach the men and to get the men to step up and step into that masculine role as a protector and a provider, and to support the mother of his child and to support the life of his child. And so everybody in the pro-life movement appears to be working towards, in one way or another, and at one speed or another, towards this same objective. So, divine timing that our paths crossed. But tell us about the men's study.
Yeah, I definitely believe that, Sean, divine timing, and something, we've long asked, people at different conferences that we go to or speak at, or, that sort of thing, I love to ask the question, what should be the next research project? What's important? And almost, I would say every single time, there's at least one person that says, you guys really need to figure out how men think about this issue and how to market and message to men, and see men as the, not necessarily the consumer of the abortion, but the still most influential person in the woman's life, in mom's life. Mom, who's the only one that has, that's why we spent so much time focusing on her and learning about her emotional response and the way she thinks about it from the right side, the emotional side of the brain, because she's the only one that can save the life of that child. In the end, it's not politicians or even we talked about how great the pregnancy centers, the work that they do. I mean, in the end, it's mom. Mom has to make that decision. She's the only one with the right to do it. It was so powerful in that interview that you guys did with in that panel with Lila Rose at Live Action. Talk a little bit about the fact that in the end, it's the woman that has the legal right to make that decision, and the man does not have a part of that. And of course, when we talk about this issue, there's going to be people that will jump on and say, well, anyway, we don't have to probably go there. But I thought that interview was so powerful because the two women that had chosen abortion despite the pleas of the men that they were with were sitting there across the table from you and Greg, who had pleaded with the women that you were with to not have the abortions. And there was definitely an empathy on the part of those women in recognizing that what they did to the men that they were with, you had happened to you as well. And there was a lot of mercy and healing kind of like just expressed on both sides. I just thought it was a really powerful, panel and I encourage
Yeah.
people to watch it.
I got something out of that I didn't know that I needed when one of those women spoke to me in response to something I had said, and it was just something that, it's what I needed to hear. Didn't make anything better, but as far as from a healing perspective, and moving one step closer, I think that's why God put me there on that day. So it was a very powerful experience, I think, and really hard. I'm really grateful to everyone that participated because I think that the message that men hurt from abortion, I think that's something that people just don't want to believe, and I mean, I've made plenty of posts where people tell me that I'm just lying, and that none of it's true, and not to get too far into research that's not your research, but while we're on the topic, the study I think I've shared with you, or you'd already seen, from Denmark, where they studied 192,000 men, 8,500 of them had lost a child to abortion, either up to 12 weeks or after 13 weeks. And of those 8,500 men, what they found using the socialized medicine, not voluntary information, was that the men who lost a child to abortion were 4.5 times more likely to seek mental health treatment, were more likely to be on prescription antidepressants, prescription sleep aids, and prescription anti-anxiety medicine. And so it's real, even if we're talking about men who don't know that they're participating by answering this. And it's real whether those, I mean, Denmark's not a particularly pro-life country as far as I'm aware. So it crosses ideological lines, and there's plenty of other studies that support that. And so I think it's really important that these conversations happen, and that we're aware of the impact on men. But I also think it's important that we're able to reach the young man in an unplanned pregnancy, because that's how we end abortion. Like, we need to heal these men, who have, just like we need to heal the women who have suffered the loss from abortion, but we need to end abortion, right? And so, am I correct in that is the market that the research is based upon, is the young man faced with an unplanned pregnancy?
Definitely, that is the primary. So we don't have the study completely designed yet, but that will be at least 2/3 of the kind of the focus of men they will have either faced unexpected pregnancies or had abortions, with the woman that they were with. And so understanding his emotional response to that situation, just like we have with the woman, is one of the primary goals for, we have kind of 3 big goals. That's number 2, is to understand his emotional response at that moment of the unexpected pregnancy, in terms of how. And so then once we understand that, then we can, like we have again with the women, craft messages that resonate with him to move him to a pro-life response. And from our research with the women, we know, especially this last study that we did on abortion healing, so this was all women, but so we didn't have any men in the abortion healing study, which would again be a wonderful kind of next step. I always ask people what the next study should be. For us, it would really be great to do, abortion healing with men. But we also know, based on like what you said, a lot of the stats are very similar to what we've seen with women, that women go through, like there's an association with all of those negative side effects, related to, the correlation between a prior abortion and, drug use, alcoholism, domestic, problems, divorce, prescription drugs. Yeah. And it goes on and on. But with the men, We also, we also want to help figure out how to help them regain their voice, to understand that they are protectors and providers, and that they can speak, again, move them to more of a pro-life, perspective, just like we have tried to do with women and had some success there. Still, obviously, a long way to go. And then just how to help men, protect their preborn children. This is a little bit more, general, but how do we, can we look at men who successfully communicated with their wife, girlfriend, partner, in getting her to choose life because that's what he wanted, like you tried to do. And I have to mention this because I don't know what we're going to find. We never know. We use a grounded theory approach. So we build a theory once we get all of the data, we build the findings out of it. We don't have a hypothesis going in with this kind of research. It's very similar to a lot of like qualitative research and grounded theory. We use something called qualitative content analysis on it. But it's the idea, though, that we don't know what we'll find. And as one of those women on the interview that you did mentioned, and I think she was trying to help you and Greg heal a little bit to a certain extent, to say, like, there's absolutely nothing you could have said to me, just like my boyfriend tried several things that could have been effective, but I was in a place that I couldn't hear it. And we may find, so
and that's
we'll
what I was
see.
referring to earlier.
Yeah.
That's the thing that Melissa said to me that was something that I think that I really needed to hear. What impact that has on me, I don't know, but and this kind of goes to what you were talking about earlier with what women are thinking about at the time of an unplanned pregnancy, which is all of the stress, like the baby versus me, right? All the stress in my life. And what I had brought up in that interview was that I know now that I was focused on the baby. You can't kill my baby. Like it's a baby. Like you just can't do this because it's a baby. And she, of course, was focused on, how is this going to change my life? Like, what is this going to mean? All the things that she is worried about, which are valid. They're valid concerns from the beginning. Like, I don't want to invalidate those concerns that women have, regardless of what choice they make. Those concerns are valid. The question is, how do we cope with those concerns, right? How do we deal with those concerns? And so what I was saying was that I was speaking to the wrong issue at the time. And what Melissa, graciously provided was that in her mind, it didn't matter, because her husband or boyfriend, I'm sorry, her significant other, whomever it was at that time, did say those things, speaking to her, and so I think that's kind of what I was referring to whenever I brought that up. But I think that brings me to something else I wanted to ask you about. As part of this study, is that something you're going to look at? Like, what is the best messaging from dad to mom to address those concerns, which you've already got studies supporting that she has, as opposed to being focused on the baby?
Right. And I think that's so, I mean, you just hit the nail on the head by thinking through like what you're, this, and I know this is difficult. I mean, this is your life, and this is what you lived. And this is kind of like what, when we do these interviews, what our, interviewees have to go through. They're going back in their mind's eye and they're reliving kind of the experience. And so it's difficult. It's very emotional a lot of times, during these interviews that we're doing. They're, 2-hour interviews, and we're helping them with visualization and relaxation and repetition. And so we're, drawing these emotions out of them. But like for you, you hit what our research has shown over the years. And this is what a lot of times other pro-lifers still have a hard time hearing. And I did too early on, like before I really got into the research. I was, just a typical like gung-ho, passionately pro-life guy that was just doing grassroots stuff. But the research, really shows that like if you're going to change her mind, and again, you didn't know this at the time, but that's why this research is so important, I think, is we're going to try to help men like you that are, will be in your situation. And again, it could be that there's not a whole lot you can say, but we do already know that you're going to have a greater likelihood of saving your child if you focus on her and her needs and how you can address like the just scared, my life is over feelings that she is having, and you address those in ways that might be, practically helpful for her, as opposed to don't kill my baby, and, that's like our former president used to say that all the time is like, do we want to do what makes us feel good, or do we want to do what works? Because when you say like, in a pregnancy center, when we worked with them a lot, like, God loves you, please don't kill your baby. Like that doesn't work. That like makes us feel good because we're saying, and again, hopefully at some point we can say that God loves you, but at that moment, she needs to be able to feel like we are talking to her and addressing the needs that she has in that moment. So, what can we help men? And your question was, are we going to be able to figure out the messages, like what exactly that men should say to the women and that sort of thing? I think the first step for our research is emotionally, what are men going through, like, in this situation, so that we can help them. Because, while yes, we will interview there will be some men like you were that will, in general, that we're interviewing all movable middle men. So we're not interviewing like pro-life men per se or pro-abortion men. We'll have a screener that will allow us to interview men that don't identify like strongly with one side or the other, so that we can, because we do know that this is still the kind of the large 60% group in the US, 20% here, 20% there. Here's the big, 60%. And so, trying to find out, I started to go down, the path earlier of saying like, can we figure out what like the men that said, I don't want, I want to keep this baby, and what else did they say or do that was effective? What are the, can we look at, some of those things? It could be that there's no real correlation. Like there's, like it just happened that woman actually was more open to it. The man didn't say anything that was better or not than, what you said or what anybody else would say. But the biggest group of men that we're going to look at are the men that we over and over, especially in this last abortion healing study, found that the majority of men say, I'll support you, whatever you choose. This is what we hear like over and over and over again, because that's what the culture has told them they should say. Now, again, that doesn't help somebody like you in your situation, but again, we're going to look at that situation too. We just have to be careful. Like we can't, we're not going to be able to, it's only so big of a study. We might have to do multiple studies afterwards, but we will look at, we'll definitely find out, how do we help that guy who thinks he's doing, because this is, I think you alluded to it earlier. If we can help men understand that they still have the most influence over that woman's decision, they still, like, in general, the woman, even though in our last study we heard her say things like, it's not up to him, it's my body, my choice, blah, 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 she would still say that I went and told him, and why would she tell him, about the unexpected pregnancy if she didn't actually want him to respond? Because she could just go get the abortion without saying anything. I mean, she wouldn't have to do that. Now, that being said, she still maybe pretty much have her mind made up, and she just wants to tell the man, I mean, but we suspect that there's something, and we'll find out. We may be wrong. Like I said, we don't have hypotheses here, but it's, by telling the man that, I'm pregnant, and maybe going so far as to say, like, what should we do? What are we going to do? She's acknowledging that he does have some influence on her, maybe not legally, but still. And we see this from quantitative studies all the time. Like, CareNet did a men's study here recently that was a huge poll, and it said, like, who, and it was for men. It said, like, who had the most influence on her decision, and it was like, me, the man, her mom, her friends, her, pastor, things like that. And it was significantly, the highest one was significantly higher. The man having the influence was the highest influence. And so if we can help a man,
and that was across the board. That was both when they asked the man and when they asked the woman.
Yeah. I mean, multiple studies have shown this, that it's still the man, even though we think, like, the other side kind of tells us that, okay, the man has no influence. And I know, again, I always go back to, like, I mean, I'm so, knowing your story, I know, like, that you obviously didn't have, I mean, you desperately wanted to have some influence there, and she didn't let you, have that influence. And so that obviously does still happen. But, like, for the majority of women out there who face unexpected pregnancies, they're still saying that it's the man who has, the most. And now, again, she may be thinking, well, he has the most influence, but he still doesn't have enough influence to make me change my decision. But just think, if we're able to understand better emotionally the man's emotional response to this situation, and move him from, I'll support you either way. That has been, like, the evil genius marketing that Planned Parenthood has. They have done a great job in terms of marketing over the years. I mean, I hate to say it, but they have hundreds of millions, now billions of dollars, unfortunately, partly from our taxes, but they've done a good job of convincing the world and men that they should say, I'll support you whatever you choose. That is being supportive, that a man's job is to support the woman. That's not real support. That's, in fact, even, the women that we interviewed from our last study in abortion healing, all of them had abortions, ranging from 2 years before the interview up to 40 years before the interview. And they all, they talked about how, and we didn't really even ask a whole lot of questions about the man, but they talked about how they would go to the man, and it was almost always, I'll support you no matter what. And the woman actually felt like, well, that's not helping me. You're not really, like, you're just putting the decision back on me at this point.
100%.
So thanks for nothing.
Like, the least supportive thing you can say is, I support whatever you want to do. That's like, hey, what restaurant do you want to go to dinner? Well, wherever you want to go. Like, you're telling me
Right.
that you can't make a decision, except we're talking about a baby. Like, you can't make a decision about a baby. So how can I trust you to be there when the baby's born? How can I trust you to be there when I'm 6 months pregnant? How can I trust you to be there if something goes wrong? How can I trust you to be there, financially? If you can't even tell me that you have an opinion on this. And so it's, where, like you said, they've been trained, society's been trained to say that that's the most supportive thing to say. And in reality, it's the least supportive thing to say.
Yeah. And if we can if we can find out how to help a man move from thinking that that's the supportive thing to say, because this was another shocking thing from this last study. A majority of the women talked about how the man actually wanted the child. And I think that's another thing that our society doesn't think. They think that in general, like 90% of abortions are just because there's, men are just being horrible men and they're getting a woman pregnant and they're forcing them or pushing them or coercing them to get the abortion so they can run off and do it again to some other woman. While that does happen, yes, the majority of the men, and again, we don't get in with this right brain research into a lot of like quantitative, like, this percentage or anything like that, but we're looking at like what is the depth and the breadth of this idea, and the widespread and deep kind of finding that we kept hearing was that the men in general, again, not every single time, but for the most part, wanted the child, and the woman either, most of the time still chose the abortion. And they, like I said, they all had abortions, but a few of them actually had an abortion and then had another unexpected pregnancy and chose life in that situation but almost all of them, the situation was the man said, I'll support you either way and whatever you choose. And so, imagine if we can move the men to an understanding that, and again, we're not going to do it just by like this study, but we're going to do it through what we find from the study and then sharing it with people that can get the message out there, like and so if we can help them understand that's not truly supportive. If you really want to support the woman and you want that child, and again, most of them do. And again, we'll also look at how do we move them from not wanting the child to moving them, to helping the man who's abortion determined or abortion minded, move him more towards a pro-life perspective. But also in the same study, looking at those who are already open to life, wanting life, because this is innate. I think this is how men are made. I think in general, and we go back to even our third study, we interviewed young men age 20 to young men and women both age 20 to 24, and men were a lot of the men were open to, in general, the men were open to, okay, if and again, not all of them had unexpected pregnancies. If I were to get a woman pregnant, I would want to step up. At that point, we have a child, and I don't know what it would look like, but how can we help that man do what he kind of is built to do what he wants to do, like deep in his soul, an innate provider, protector, as I love the intro that you had there, that men are providers and protectors. And there's something built into us. And how do we help men move from I'll support you no matter what you choose to, I know I might not have been the most responsible man, up to this point, but I will be there for you. I don't know what it looks like exactly, and again, probably a lot of the things that you said, but what ways can we help, men, men move that aren't in that position? Because I truly believe that if we can get, and again, tragically, it didn't happen for you and a lot of men, and it will continue that way unless we really move. Because there are women out there there are women that would have responded to what you said. If you would have said that to, based on the women that we've interviewed, that's what they needed to hear. They wanted to hear that. Again, it's not a magic bullet or silver bullet or anything like that where we're going to just end abortion, but imagine how much we could, hit the abortion industry where it counts in terms of money and taking away, abortions, if we can move a significant number of men, to a place where they say, I will support you. I will be there. I don't know what this looks like, and again, we don't know what that message is yet. But if we can just get men, I mean, I think just that simple fact of moving, and again, the study itself won't do it, but it's the findings. If the data backs this up, if we, once we find out what those specific messages look like, and how emotionally do we take a man that says, okay, well, I said I'll support you no matter what you choose because I thought that's what was the most supportive thing, and we find some messages that say that resonate with him emotionally to say, okay, don't say that, say this. If you really want to support her, don't say that, say this. And again, we're all about, getting the messaging out there through these other groups, and that sort of thing. So hopefully we'll see.
What's the timeline?
Yeah.
I've never asked a researcher what the timeline is on their research. So that may be a silly question because it's as long as it takes, right?
It is. I mean, I was going to say we're hoping to start. I can tell you that in July. Yeah. So it's coming up, and we're obviously kind of putting the interview protocol together about the questions, and we've got kind of like these big ideas that we've been discussing today and these topics and such. But how do we frame the questions to elicit the responses and the data that we can then analyze and to produce findings. So it's a unique kind of form of research, but again, the analysis is very similar to what you would do with any sort of qualitative research in social science. So
well, it's very cool, and I'm very excited to continue to talk with you about that, because I think that the messaging is so aligned with what it is that Men for Life is trying to do right now, which is to build a fatherhood curriculum for messaging, essentially for messaging for pro-life pregnancy centers, pregnancy resource centers to use to reach dads. And there's some groups that are already doing this, and they're doing an amazing job. I think we bring a different perspective and can maybe reach different men. And so we're all on the same path, as far as how do we reach these men to get them to value being men and what that really means, to get them to value life, and to get them to step up to protect and to provide for the lives that God has put into their charge. So I'm excited to see what happens. I'm excited to see what comes from this study. Before we close out, I do want to ask, the Vitae Foundation is a nonprofit, so they thrive on donations. So I would ask that anybody that is listening or watching this message and that this resonates with you and you want to be supportive of this research, to go to vitaefoundation.org. Is that where they would be able to figure out how to donate?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Appreciate it, Sean. Yep.
Other than that, how can we follow? How can we find? How can we support the Vitae Foundation in the work that you're doing?
Yeah.
We didn't talk about.
I'm
going to cut myself off. We got Celebrate Life. Vitae will be at Celebrate Life conference in DC, June 27th through 29th, on the anniversary of the Dobbs decision. Anyone who's listening to this, we encourage you to attend. This should be going out next Monday, which is the Monday before that, and I'm sure there will still be time to buy tickets. So it's the Celebrate Life conference in Washington, D.C., June 27th through 29th. Now that I've plugged the conference, I'm very excited to go to that and to to get to talk to everybody that's doing so many amazing things in the pro-life movement. How else can people support and find the Vitae Foundation?
Yeah, if you guys go to vitaeresearchinstitute.org, that is where my world lives, all the research and everything. So if you find this interesting, I know some people do, you can go to vitaeresearchinstitute.org, and that's a research focused website for all like pregnancy centers, if you hear this and you think that this kind of research might be able to help you, we have a free site that's called vitaevault.org. And you do have to just sign up for that to make sure that you are a pregnancy center and that sort of thing. But then a lot of this research is and there's blogs and there's specific campaigns designed for pregnancy centers. It's all available free at vitaevault.org, and they can get on through there. But yeah, vitaefoundation.org is the main site where they can support and donate, which we really appreciate because it is all nonprofit, and being able to do this and give away all this research and help these other pro-life organizations around the country do their work and do it more effectively is what we're all about. So and we do it all all for free, and we don't charge any of the other organizations anything to use the research or to when we do trainings and that sort of thing. It's all done because that's part of what the mission is at this point. Like I said, we've had these different iterations, but that's now what we're all about. So appreciate the opportunity, Sean.
Well, I think that's amazing, and I'm grateful for everything the Vitae Foundation is doing. I'm really excited to see this study, and I'm grateful for you taking the time today. Dr. Jeffrey Pauls with the Vitae Foundation, the Director of Research. Thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
All right. Thank you, Sean. Appreciate it.